Hello everyone, welcome to this Algebra 2 session on absolute value and number lines. So what we're going to be doing is using the properties of opposites and absolute value to simplify, evaluate, and compare expressions. Find rational numbers that are between two other rational numbers. So by definition, we've already talked about what absolute value means. It's the distance on a number line from 0 to another number. So let's put that up here. Distance from 0 to a number on the number line. So if you need to pause, you can. We actually have talked about that before. So some example problems, and I actually did one very similar to this in the first lesson for Foundations, 302 class, you'll remember that. Simplify negative absolute value of -3. Well, what we want to do first is look at taking the absolute value of -3. So I'm going to leave that negative that's out front here there. And I'm going to work on the absolute value of -3. So the absolute value of -3 is the distance from -3 to 0 on the number line. And that's going to be a positive distance of 3. So when I take the absolute value of -3, I get a positive 3. But my answer ends up being a -3 because of this negative out front. So it's saying take the opposite or negative of the absolute value of -3. So I get -3 as an answer. Then this next problem, if x is equal to -4, simplify the absolute value of 2 plus 3x. Now, what is that asking me to do? Well, it wants me to take the -4 and put it into my absolute value expression replacing the x. But in order to do that, I need to know what operation I'm looking at right here. The 3x, the x is in parentheses. What does that mean? Well, when I don't see an operation there, such as addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division, if it's just a number and a variable right next to each other, or a number and a variable in parentheses, but they're right next to each other, that means multiplication. So what I'm doing is I'm going to do the absolute value of 2 plus 3 times, and I'm replacing that x with -4. Now following order of operations tells me to multiply the 3 times -4 first. So I will have 2 plus -12. So I'm doing the absolute value of 2 plus -12. So that's the absolute value of 2 plus -12 is going to be -10. Opposite signs we subtract, take the sign of the larger number. So that's how I get the -10. Absolute value of -10 is going to be equal to a positive 10 because it's the distance from 0 to -10 on the number line. Now something you may or may not have done before. What rational number is 1/3 of the way between -3 and 21? Now you can put -3 and 21 on a number line and you can find what rational number is 1/3 of the way between those two. Okay, and we're looking at 1/3 of the way from -3, not from the 21, from the -3. So you can put it on a number line, like I said. If you can think of it in your head, that's fine. I'm going to show you 3 steps in order to figure it out. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to find the difference between -3 and 21. So we want to make sure that we do this correctly, though, because there's negative signs involved. So you can use absolute value. The absolute value of -3 minus 21. It doesn't really matter what order I do this in. It could be 21 minus -3. But you have to be very careful with signs here, guys. Very careful with that. So what I'm doing is the absolute value of -24. And that tells me that the distance between -3 and 21 is a positive 24. Because the absolute value of -24 is 24. So what do I do with that then? Well, I know the distance now between the two. I want the number that's 1/3 of that distance. But when I do this, and this is where it gets a little confusing, well, I shouldn't say it gets confusing, the number that we get may confuse you. I'm going to take 1/3. I want to know 1/3, the number that's 1/3 of the way. So I'm going to take 1/3 of the distance I just found. So I'm going to take 1/3 times 24, and that gives me 8. So take 1/3 of your distance, or 1/2, whatever you're asked to find, and that gives me 8. 8 is the distance between -3 and the number that's 1/3 of the way. So 8 is not the number that's 1/3 of the way. It's the distance from -3 to the number that's 1/3 of the way. So think of it this way. I'm just going to do a very small approximate number line here. Let's say this is -3 and this is 21. We know that this distance here is 24. So 1/3 of the way, that distance is 8. Now what we need to do, though, is actually find what number that is. So to find that number on the number line, I'm going to take -3 plus 8. And that gives me 5. So 5 is the actual number. 5 is the number that is 1/3 of the way between -3 and 21. Okay, so you want to be careful of that. When you take 1/3 of the distance, or 1/2, or whatever you're looking for, the 8 was not our actual number, it was a distance. And then we needed to find the number by taking that distance and adding it to our beginning number of -3. All right, let's try one more, and you may want to pause it to try it on your own, see if you get the answer. So if you want to do that, pause it now, please. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the distance between 5.5 and 13. And again, it doesn't matter if I do, because I'm doing the absolute value. So I'm doing the absolute value of 5.5 minus 13, or I can do the absolute value of 13 minus 5.5. It really doesn't matter, because you're going to get the same result. It's going to be the absolute value of -7.5, which is a positive 7.5. These are our 3 steps here. And I want to know the rational number that's half of the way between 5.5 and 13. So I want to know, this is a distance again, okay? This is the distance between the two numbers. So I'm going to do half of that, because I want half of that distance. And half of that distance is 3.75. And what I do then is I get 3.75 and I add 5.5 plus the 3.75, and that gives me my answer of 9.25 as my answer. And that ends the session.